Hello, everyone. Welcome to Workshop 5, Proposal for a Regulation Laying Down Rules to Prevent and Combat Child Sexual Abuse.
Do you have a microphone available because you're very soft?
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, speaking loud.
Oh, for the audience, yes. I'm sorry, we only have the microphone for the online, but we don't have a microphone for the room, so I'll try to speak up. Sorry. So we'll be discussing the EU Commission's proposal in this discussion. My name is Evelina Karhu. I'm an advisor at Save the Children Finland, and I'll be the on-site moderator for this workshop. My colleague Tanya Simola, who's the development manager at Save the Children Finland, will be helping me moderate this session. Thank you, first of all, to EuroDIG for hosting this discussion and for the organizing team for making it happen. We have a great panel of key participants here today, some of them online and 2 of them here in Tampere. I'll soon briefly introduce our key participants, and you can see their full introduction texts on the wiki. But before we get to that, just to let you know that the format of this workshop is going to be conversational. So at any point you can interject, raise your hand, ask a question or comment. There's also an option to comment or ask questions anonymously on the wiki, which is through Mentimeter. So you can use that if you prefer to do an anonymous question. Now we will start the session by asking all the key participants 1 question, so the same question to all of them, and then we'll move on from there. Now, before we start the conversation itself, the key participants are Kimmo Ulkuniemi, who is the Chief Superintendent in the National Police Board of Finland, and Kimmo is here on site in Tampere. We have Michael Tanks, who is Head of Policy and Public Affairs at the Internet Watch Foundation. Michael is also here. We have Dr. Desara Dushi, who is the postdoctoral researcher at Vrije Universiteit Brussels, and Desara is online, joining us online. We have Torsten Krause, who's a project consultant, child protection and children's rights in the digital world at the Digital Opportunities Foundation Germany, and Torsten is also joining us online. Now, to get started, I'll ask our key participants the first question, which is, what is your key takeaway from the EU Commission's proposal? Kimmo, would you like to start?
Thank you, and I have to check. Good morning on my behalf. I'm glad to be here, having opportunity also from the law enforcement or bring the law enforcement perspective to this issue. Before I came here, I had a short, good discussion with my Finnish friends at the lobby. And it's quite clear that this new proposal for regulation or the views for the regulations are not the same in law enforcement and civil society and NGOs and so on. But personally, I think it's a pre-proposal for new legislation. So there has to be something done to protect children from the sexual abuse online, also offline. And when I first read the regulation and also the impact assessment, my first thought was that it was about the time to do something. We have been debating and discussing this issue over the years, and no one has been able to provide any proposal or solution to tackle this problem. So this new regulation is a proposal for regulation. It's a completely new approach to solve these problems. And it's more than detection order. I'm quite sure that when we are discussing about the regulation, we are going to discuss a lot about detection order and how that would impact to communication, encryption, and cybersecurity overall. But we should not only focus in encryption and detection order. That regulation also includes other measures for governments and private sector, and also civil society and NGOs. And what I said earlier before this panel, I said that I love discussion, I love debate about problems. And earlier when this regulation was discussed, I often got a reply that this is so difficult problem that we should not even discuss about it. We should forget it, and it's better, maybe sometimes it's better not to do anything than trying to find solutions for the problems. So instead of saying that it's not possible or regulation is bad, we should have also solutions. So what I would like to hear from civil society and other people participating in discussion is, what would be your solution? If detection order and if this proposal for regulation is bad, what would you propose for the solution, how we can protect children online? I think I'm going to stop here, and later on I hope I have possibilities also to point my views from the law enforcement side. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you, Kimmo. And next I'll pose the same question to you, Michael. So what is your key takeaway from the EU proposal?
Thank you. So like Kimmo, I think this proposal is really important, and I also think it's much needed. And there are some significant issues that we have to address. I want to start off by sort of setting out the scene as we currently see it in relation to some of the data that the Internet Watch Foundation has released in April this year in relation to the amount of child sexual abuse we removed from the internet last year. 59% of the content we removed in the last year was hosted in an EU member state. So Europe is the global leader, if you like, for the distribution or certainly the hosting of child sexual abuse material from what we see. We've seen a doubling in the most severe forms of child sexual abuse online in the last 2 years. We've seen that self-generated indecent images of children are becoming much more common, now accounting for 2/3 of the content that we remove from the internet. And that mainly affects girls in the 11 to 13-year-old age range. And we're seeing that get younger in the last few years as well. So it's now affecting 7 to 10-year-olds as well. And I think these are quite shocking statistics in terms of where we're at the moment. And when we explore the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and all of us spending much more time online, and of course, as more content gets uploaded online, we're going to have more of these issues as well. Coming on to the regulation itself, I think there's a few important things that we need to resolve. And sort of key to that is that currently companies are able to detect child sexual abuse material because they have clear legal certainty to do so, because we have a temporary derogation from the Privacy Directive and the Electronic Communications Code. But prior to the recent changes which brought email and messaging services within the scope of the Privacy Directive through the Electronic Communications Code, they always had the certainty to do that. So I think the first point I would make is that companies have always been able to do this, and that we're not talking about something new. Companies have been able to detect child sexual abuse material, and it's our view that that should continue. And I think that it's really, really important that, you know, we're coming up against a hard deadline of the temporary derogation ending next year. And basically we have to have resolution on this before that comes to an end. And we have seen the impact of what happens if we don't have clear certainty for the companies to be able to detect, because reports from European accounts dropped by around 50–60% in the 6 months where we didn't have this certainty. So that's child sexual abuse material that we know is happening now, but wasn't being reported within that period. And I don't think that that's a situation that we want to be in. With what I've set out in terms of the statistics already, as Europe as the global leader going forward. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to take steps to better protect children online. And I look forward to being able to discuss that with others later today.
Perfect. Thank you, Michael. We definitely see the same developments at Save the Children Finland when it comes to child sexual abuse material. Online participants, Desara, would you like to answer the same question? So what is your key takeaway from the EU Commission's proposal?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for this very interesting panel. I'm really happy to be able to give my thoughts about this. When I first heard about this new proposal, also me, like my first reaction was the same like Kimo. It was about time. And I've been calling for new regulation in my PhD thesis, which ended in 2019. So there is a long time period since then, long when we think in terms of the numbers that Michael just mentioned, how many children get abused every day. But then when I read the text, I thought that there are many flaws. I would have imagined it differently. Now, and I will tell you why. The main goal of the current proposal, at least the one that is publicly announced, I don't want now to speculate about the hidden goal of mass surveillance for all sorts of purposes. So the main goal is the protection of children from sexual abuse and exploitation with an online element. I think we all want this goal to be achieved as much as possible, of course, and by all means, everyone except the ones who have a sexual interest in children, of course. Now the question is, how can it be achieved, and how does the EU Commission propose to achieve that? There are three big changes to the current state of affairs that are proposed in this draft regulation. First is moving from voluntary untargeted detection from the internet service providers to mandatory targeted detection. It seeks this movement, this change seeks to provide legal certainty to providers as to their responsibilities to assess and mitigate risks, to detect, to report, and also to remove online CSAM, child sexual abuse material, in a manner that is consistent with the fundamental rights that are laid down in the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union and the existing EU law. The voluntary detection has already a clear endpoint, as already mentioned by Michael. It is August next year, because it was functioning on a temporary derogation basis. So there was obviously the need to think of what are we going to do afterwards, because we do not want all sorts of detection to just stop happening, because then we will leave children unprotected, completely unprotected. And the current proposal is supposed to enter into force at the moment when this temporary derogation stops working. However, the current proposal suggests that internet service providers would have to wait to receive a detection order before acting, which they would only get upon failing risk assessment. This is because under the e-privacy directive, the internet service providers require an explicit legal basis to process communications of metadata. In practice, this would mean that all the proactive work that is currently already happening would come to an end. And moreover, the mandatory detection regime risks that companies are incentivized to overfilter at the risk mitigation stage to avoid the issuance of mandatory detection orders, because these mandatory detection orders, if they fail to comply with them, then they risk to have high penalties. So we are faced with two situations. Either it will stop completely the detection, or it will make the internet service providers to overload, to overproduce, to scan everything, all the communications, and to overproduce a lot of material, which most of them will be false positives, for example, and it will also cause a lot of problems with the work of law enforcement and Europol more specifically. And second, to date, internet service providers are working on detection of known child sexual abuse material only, and the Commission proposes obliging them to also detect new CSAM and grooming. And this is where it starts getting problematic, and I will talk about that later when we move to the fundamental rights concerns. And third, there is the creation of the EU Center, which will serve as, how we see it, as the one-stop shop, like monitoring mechanism, assisting with new technology, providing guidelines, collaborations, and much more. This center is empowered to produce a list of indicators. It shall ensure that the list of indicators that will be gathered to lawfully carry out obligations imposed on different providers is aligned and updated with those requirements endorsed by NCMEC, which is the one based in US, and they have this large database of child sexual abuse material, which is currently the main database that is used for identification of online material. And in the current text of the proposal, I don't see anything explaining how this new EU center will cope with the two databases. How will they make it possible that these two databases merge with each other, or how will they collaborate with the one based in US, and how will they make sure there is no overlapping of the work in process, and how will the internet service providers decide where to report, to the EU center or to the one in US, because we know that this is an online crime. So we don't have that many cases where US is not involved, for example, or it's not only happening in the EU. So we need some kind of beyond EU collaboration, and this is not really clear how it will happen in the current text. And the role of the hotlines in the framework of the EU Center needs to be clarified, because I don't see anything explained regarding how will the EU Center collaborate with the hotlines. And the hotlines currently have an important role in the combating of child sexual abuse online. For years, they have successfully worked in this area, detecting and removing content from the internet. The current proposal really needs to be amended in order to fix this. And I have also, in a conference that happened 1 week ago here in Brussels, for example, there was somebody from the hotlines here in Europe, in EU, that was complaining that they were not consulted during the drafting process of this new regulation, and I see this as problematic. Now, to conclude, while the intentions are good, the implementation of this in practice has many implications, starting from the technology, and I wonder whether the drafters of this proposal have also consulted tech experts, child rights experts, fundamental rights experts, and privacy experts, and to what extent, because we've seen everyone is concerned, and I have seen many of these experts complaining that they have not been consulted at all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Desara. And then also to Torsten, would you like to answer the same question? So what is your key takeaway from this EU proposal?
Kiitos, Evelina. Ja, hyvä päivä. I'm sending warm greetings from sunny Berlin to beautiful Tampere. My key takeaway are the obligatory risk assessment and the risk mitigation. As you remember, the internet and the digital services are established and create in a way where nobody had children as users in mind, but children are 1/3 of the population or the users of the internet, and they use services which are not enabled for them. Services declare their, or providers declare their services, for example, for users older than 13 or 16 years, but nobody controls or take mitigations to take care if the users are old enough for their services. And the solution should not be that we exclude children from the services. They have the right to access media as declared in the Child Rights Convention, Article 17, and also explained in General Comment 25. And so I think we should find solutions that children could take part in the services, but the providers are responsible to create safe services for children also. And therefore, I appreciate that providers should be committed to do risk assessment and find solutions to create safe services for children and all the other users. And yeah, therefore I appreciate this proposal, and this is my key takeaway. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Torsten. Would the audience either hear? Yes, please.
I'm Tapani Talvainen from Finland.
Would you like to come to the front to ask or comment? If you want to, you can do, for example, here. Thank you.
So I was about to say, I'm also something of a mathematician by training, and I'm looking at the numbers from most published reports, also then the Commission impact assessment, which I quickly browsed looking for numbers. I might catch the numbers quickly. In particular, this detection of new season material. The published numbers here are precision rate, which is all but useless. It tells you that once it has been detected, how likely it was to be false. But what they do not publish is what's the false positive rate, and you can't figure it out. That is how likely an innocent message is to be detected as season. And the numbers are very different in significance. Let's say that, well, they give numbers here that the precision rate is above 90%, maybe 99.9. Let's say that the false positive rate is 99.999 for 5 nines. What does that come to mean? Given that means, given any message, the likelihood of it being misdetected is 1 in 100,000. Maybe that's, I don't know, that's just a random figure I pulled out of my hat, but presume that it could be something like that. If that's the case, let's do some math. How many messages an individual gets or sends every day? Let's say nowadays, looking at how people chat, 100. You send 100 messages a day, and that percentage, that means that during 1 year, the probability that you will be wrongly accused is 30%, 31%. That means you will be getting enormous number of false positives here. We have about 500 people in the EU, and you end up getting 170 million false positives every year. Nobody will have time to research it. So why this number is not in any of these research? Because it's critical for this to work. And in this kind of message, when they are looking for something that's the base rate is small, I assume most people are not looking for child season material. So that kind of research always ends up at even a very small false positive rate accumulates exponentially. It will be a disaster pretty soon. And we are getting that kind of false positive rate so that millions of people end up wrongly accused. Of course, first, it's not nice to be wrongly accused of child abuse. We have some examples of what happens. Even when you are cleared, the process is bad. And worse, if that happens a lot, people stop caring. They think this must be a false alarm anyway. We are a cry wolf situation. So that, again, somebody's accused of child abuse, they say, oh, it was a computer glitch. And we are actually worse than we were before. So unless you can get, well, actually, I can't see any way, because however small you get the false positive rate, if it's a significant, it will pretty quickly accumulate to ridiculous numbers. So I would very much want this number to be come out and calculated out. What does it end up being? Because this precision rate that they advertise does not tell anything useful. That's my first takeaway. I have some more, but let's start with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would one of the key participants like to start?
Well, just a quick comment. Like Michael said before, companies are doing this already, detecting child abuse material and then sharing information with contact points. But yeah, I do agree that there are challenges, and that's why the regulation also stipulates the ways that we have to have technology and we have to have a detection built in a way that it ensures the privacy. It also decreases the possibilities for false positives. And then what you have to understand also, that you said that you would be blamed for that. Internet service providers, they should have enough resources to go through this what has been detected, and then cross out those that are not relevant to be reported to EU Center or to law enforcement. So it's also up to internet service providers, the private sector, to build their processes and their systems in a way that there's also human interaction. You said that, well, there aren't enough resources, but
Do the math.
yeah, I'm really bad with that, but I trust your math is correct.
Can I quickly ask, so what would you
Sir,
be
sir.
prepared to
Sir, can I
handle?
intervene? Could you introduce yourself and your affiliation?
Okay, my name is Lars Eckert at EuroDIG. Yeah. So there's a follow-on, but flip this around and not talk about the map. But how many cases do you think authorities are able to handle per day? 1 million or some ballpark number, because then you can do the math the other way, and you can sort of figure out what precision rate do you need the technology to have. And I'm pretty sure there will be a large gap between what you can handle in terms of resourcing and in terms of the amount of messages that sent. And so this is a very hard problem, and it might well be unsolvable. And I think we need to keep that in the head of right. Because if it was easy, we would have had a solution long ago. So looking at the other direction, like what resources do you think are available, and figuring out if that lets go anywhere. And sorry, I jumped in.
No, I'm just going to repeat it so that to make sure that the online audience also hears. So there was a question about law enforcement resources and how they would match to the numbers that we've discussed. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. There are questions from the audience. So would you like?
Evelina, if I may add something to the first
Yes,
question.
absolutely.
So thank you very much for raising the question, the first one. It's really an important one, and it is one of my concerns as well. And just for a clarification, the current text of the regulation as a requirement, it says the detection of grooming will only be made in communications between a child and adult. And this is already problematic, at least from my perspective, because how can we detect and verify the age of each user? Do we trust self-declaration of user? Because yeah, when we register and create an account, we have to declare the age, but we all know that it's very simple to write whatever age. And we know also from research that usually the people with sexual interest in children who enter the internet for those purposes, they actually do not declare their real age. And most of the times they declare as being children themselves. So they won't fall under this sort of scanning, because they will be, let's say, I'm a 30-year-old and I declare myself as a 15-year-old and I start communicating with a 15-year-old. So it looks like a normal communication between children, and nobody will detect that there is grooming happening over there. This is a problem in itself with all of these fake profiles. And the second is that there is no evidence, like the first person already mentioned, that the technology actually works. And there will happen many false positives, and all of these false positives will hinder the work of law enforcement and Europol in this case, and will, by overloading them with these false positives, and then they will leave the real cases unsolved. And it can happen, and there are cases already that Google flagged some parents for identifying, for example, images. Now, this is not grooming, this is for images, but they flagged these parents as being sexual abusers of children because they had images of their children's genitals, but they had those images because they sent them to the doctor because their child had some problems. And then the person was cleared from the charges, but Google still blocked access to that person. So still Google decided that, made the final decision. I mean, so how much power do we give to the companies to decide about who we consider sexual abusers? Or what will happen in cases of two teenagers communicating with each other and sending self-generated images? Like a 17-year-old is considered a child from the laws, but an 18-year-old is considered an adult. But you see, they might be in a relationship, and what will happen in this case? Will the 18-year-old be flagged as a potential child sexual abuser just because he or she is 18. So these are very problematic situations, and the current text doesn't really clarify how we will solve these issues.
Thank you, Desara. We have a list here going of all the comments and questions, but just to give law enforcement perspective, so Kimmo, the opportunity to perhaps reflect on what was said earlier. Do you have a comment on the questions?
Sure, yeah, thank you. It was an excellent point. Does law enforcement have enough resources to investigate all the cases? If you ask from any law enforcement agency that do they have enough resources, for sure you know that our reply would be no, definitely we don't have enough resources, but that's maybe a different discussion about that. But what I think it's important that if we in law enforcement receive information that there might be a sexual abuse going on, we can hopefully, we have enough resources to quickly analyze that information and at least stop new victims for this offender. So there was a case in Finland, well, in fact, 2 cases in 2 years, more than 200 victims in that case, most of the victims from Snapchat, for example. So those predators, they are trying to find new victims all the time. And if we can get the information that this is going on now, hopefully we can stop that. And then investigation will take time, that's for sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I believe you had a question, so please, would you like to come to the front?
I will speak
Okay.
louder. Yeah. I'm very proud of Internet Society. This crime is horrible, and law that tackles it is very much welcome. The problem is that if we look at the views of the European Data Protection Supervisor, the additional impact assessment that has been written by the European Parliament, and also the European Council Legal Service. This is disproportionate. So these documents are reasons enough to go back to this draft legislation and go back to the drawing board and rewrite it again, because it's disproportionate what they need to us. This example of girls making self-simulated photos of 7 to 10 years old. Why do we want to address this issue with a technical solution? This is a society problem. There's something wrong going on in those households. Why do I have to allow installing something on my phone to solve a society problem? In that household, there's something wrong with those parents. Why do we have to tackle these social problems with technology? They have to be tackled through socially, right? Main problem here is how this proposal is weakening things. We cannot allow this to happen because it's fundamental of the trustworthy. I'm sorry to say this is an attempt to withdraw from us the right to communicate private. So, without those reasons, this proposal should go back to the drawing board and write something that is more reasonable.
Thank you. Then I believe Jutta online, Jutta Kroll, had a question or comment. Would you like to interject now?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for giving me the floor. I just wanted to comment on the first speaker from the audience. Of course, false positives are an issue, but do you really think that we could weigh a child that is abused versus another person being falsely accused? I do think that is a very, very difficult situation. And we, of course, cannot leave that question only to technology. We would need human resources to solve these issues. And therefore, we really appreciate that the European Center will also be commissioned to work towards those decisions and, of course, to reduce the number of false positives. I also would refer to the question of law enforcement resources. And I just do think that we could not recommend to close the eyes to these issues and problems, because we assume law enforcement cannot handle the huge number of cases that may occur, of course. And we have to have in mind that it's not only talking about people with a pedophile orientation or interest in children. Many cases are just out of commercial interest in producing income out of child sexual abuse. A final comment, I think it was Desara who commented on the Google case, and I really do think that was a problem, but of course, artificial intelligence had detected correctly the images. These were not false positives, because the images were of a child's genitals. What was the problem is that there were no rules and regulations for Google how to handle such cases. And therefore we think that in the regulation, we need rules for the companies how to handle in case of the system. The algorithm says, here we have an image that shows a child's genitals, and then the procedures afterwards need to be corrected. With regard to the question of age verification, and I see that is already discussed in the chat, I would appreciate if Torsten could speak about that, because we are already working in Germany in this regard, and please give the floor to Torsten to explain a little bit how probably age verification could also help to solve the issues. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jutta. Yes, we can jump to Torsten next, and then we will move on with the questions here. So Torsten, would you like to comment, especially on age verification?
Yes, thank you very much, Jutta and Evelina. Before, I would like to add that in my perspective, detection order should be a kind of last resort. Before that, we have a lot of steps in laying down in the proposal how to solve the problem and how to mitigate risk. And I see detection order as a kind of way to give pressure to the providers to reach for mitigate the risks and find solutions and measures how to create safe services for children. Then the aim is that we want to prevent child sexual abuse and not look afterwards what should be done when it happened. We want to prevent it. At the age verification issue, first I would say it is as one option also laying down in the proposal that age verification could help to solve the problem. And yes, it's also hard to find solution regarding anonymously ways to verify the age of users. But I think that we should try to find a solution to verify the age of all the users, not only of children, not only to control if children are old enough to use the service, but of all users. And if we find a solution where without saying the name, without saying the picture, the passport, the driver's license, without verification about then a bank account or something like that, we have to find ways where also children are possible to verify their age. And if we know maybe not the precise age of the users, but a range of the age, maybe from 10 to 12 or 18 plus or 16 to 18, then we can find solution to mitigate the risk. For example, if we say people older than 18 should not contact users younger than 13 at a service or something like that. This should be discussed, but the key for all of the mitigation, maybe not for all, but for most of the mitigation measures, is to know the age of the users.
Thank you very much, Torsten. And Michael, did you have something you wanted to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a lot of different themes that have come up here, but I'm just going to go on the new CSAM and the precision rate. I think that's important. I think when we were looking at measures like photo-DNA previously, these were the same problems that we came up against when we created photo-DNA, which now accurately detects child sexual abuse material as a well-known tool. So I think it's about setting challenges to companies to be better at detecting this. And I think when we look back at the proposal as a whole, it's about risk assessment, right? So it's what steps can companies take to prevent their platforms from being abused? What do they know about their platforms in terms of the design choices and features that they have in it that could be exploited and used, and what possible mitigations could you put in place? You could also, you know, in the detection of new imagery, for example, that's something that this proposal also says, is there the possibility to stack classifiers on top of each other? So could you detect nudity, for example, and then stack some age verification technology around that as well? So I think it's about exploring the art of the possible, and it should be, we should be giving companies space to innovate in response to this problem, giving them certainty and able to innovate to that, and say, how as a society do we get better at solving these problems, whether that's through law enforcement investigations and focusing resources there, but also, you know, setting that challenge to the companies as well, and what part do we all have to play in that? On the legal opinions that was mentioned around that, I think there was also, you know, the same accusation that you can level at the Commission for the lack of consultation with civil society, with tech and whatever. I think it's exactly the same for some of those other opinions that came out, that they didn't consult widely enough either, and that, you know, they didn't take the time to consider that. So I think when you look at the EDPB opinion, for example, it looked very much at what the current state of European law was, and didn't really take into account the fact that we do have a temporary derogation from some of these laws already. And the situation before that was they were allowed to detect child sexual abuse imagery and encouraged to do so. So I think there were some bits that were missing from some of those opinions that we need to address. On the societal problems, I completely agree. I completely agree that it is a societal problem. But and you know, I'd love to see us investing more in prevention, in making sure that these images aren't there in the first place. I do think that is a vital part of the solution. But I also think that we shouldn't be turning a blind eye to the fact that this abuse is happening on technology platforms as well, and encouraging that as well. Encryption, I mean, I can see already in the chat that there is a paper posted to the bugs in your pocket piece, but there is also a paper which I'd encourage you all to read from Ian Levy and Crispin Robinson, two of the most highly respected cryptographers in the UK, which says there's a number of things that companies aren't doing so far to explore about what you could do in encrypted services to protect child sexual abuse. And we're already doing this for things like malware, phishing, and other forms of content. So why shouldn't we be doing it for child sexual abuse material as well, particularly given it is such an egregious harm that has a huge impact on victims. And I think anything that we can do to stop this content from circulating online, we should be exploring. It cannot be right that we allow child sexual abuse material to freely circulate on the internet.
Thank you, Michael. Now we had a question in the audience or a comment. Did you have something?
Yeah, it was a comment to something that was said a long time ago.
Okay, all right. Next we had Andrew, but you did lower your hand. Did you want to comment on something online? Andrew Kemplin? Oh, you're here. Perfect. You confused me by being both online and present here, please.
Yeah, I'll say from the front, because I haven't got the loudest voice, and I'm conscious there are people online, so they've been complaining they can't hear us very well. Just a couple of comments. Where people have highlighted the difficulties, I would respectfully suggest that's not a reason to not act. You know, direct your intellect to solving the problems rather than saying there are problems, because if we simply focus on the problems, we'll never do anything, and that's ridiculous. I just want to emphasize something that Mike said at the start, which is, yeah, roughly 2/3 of the known child sex abuse imagery is currently stored in Europe. to suggest that we should do nothing about that is totally unacceptable. They're all crimes. It is illegal. To ignore it is just not appropriate. And it is possible to act. And I would point out that in the UK, where a lot of imagery was stored, it's now down to 0.5% of the imagery. So action can be taken and is provable as being effective. And then on the false positives issue, again, if I look at how it's done, I should say, by the way, I'm a trustee of the Internet Watch Foundation to declare an interest. So how the IWF does it, all suspected illegal images are assessed by a human, and then they're quality checked by, the assessment's quality checked by another human. So there should not be any false positives by the time it's reported to law enforcement agencies to take action. So whether you can automate that is a completely separate question. Yeah, if you do that process, then you should have zero false positives. And then finally, just saying, I'll put it in the chat in case people in the room aren't looking at it, where people just raise questions about age verification. I know there are services, online services, which do implement effective age verification. One that I'm aware of is OnlyFans. So maybe we should look to see this, look at the services that have implemented it and see whether their processes approach can be replicated. And very lastly, a lot of the comments sort of hint at privacy concerns. I would respectfully point out that privacy, as I've said in a different discussion earlier, is a qualified right. Some of the rights that are being impaired of children are absolute rights. So if you have to trade one right against the other, then privacy in law loses. So you can't focus just on the privacy implications. If you're going to look at human rights, look at all of them. There's more than one, and privacy is qualified, not absolute.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Next, we had a question here from the audience. Yes, in the yellow jacket, please. Would you like to come to the front, or?
I can just speak up if everybody can hear me. So my name is EuroDIG. I'm part of the EuroDIG group, and I don't really have questions at this point, but just concerns that I want to raise. So, I mean, it's an important topic, no question. We all want to do something to better. However, I feel like there is currently, this is too intrusive as for what it is. There are 2 points specifically that I want to raise. I come from a more cybersecurity background, and first, we see this, that where there is a will, there is a way. They will. So there are other ways cyber criminals or criminals have found their own hardware devices that were then encrypted phones that were not like functioning around it, and all these things would not necessarily be that easy to detect. That so in the end, if criminals are aware of the surveillance that is being placed on them, they will try to find ways around it. And what happens is that the people that are being then under like surveillance are most likely not to be the majority, the people that are actually perpetrating these actions. And the second point is, I mean, slippery slope is always like, you can always say that, but there are 2 specific risks that I want to highlight. The first one is, so I had a look at how Russian internet governance has like developed over time. And it has implemented surveillance or censorship measures, and oftentimes justifies them by what they claim are similar measures in like Western democratic countries, specifically the NetzDG, so the German yeah, exactly. This one, which is very clearly against hate speech, is what they say is the basis for their censorship laws that they have, which are way more far-reaching. So if the EU implements something so intrusive, a lot of authoritarian states will follow through and justify their activities, which then would be used against citizens and maybe political activists, human rights activists, would be justified by this intrusive way. And another thing is, while the EU is in itself a democratic institution, this does not need to be always the case for all member states. There are currently attempts to undermine human rights, specifically bodily autonomy of women in various countries. And when we have such an intrusive law that forces certain companies to break encryption and allow access and monitoring of messages, that can also be used and exploited for other means. We had in Germany, again, that's my background, the COVID tracing app, which was specifically only to be used in that case, and police still went and used it for criminal investigations. And we see that other apps on health information is also passed on and used in front of courts, Google searches, and so on, and so forth, and so on. So there are so many risks associated with that that go beyond just the, oh, we have privacy, but actually, like, what does this mean to us, the normal citizens as well, that we really should, in my opinion, refrain from having such intrusive measures.
Very much, and based on what's written in the chat, I believe that people could hear online as well what you said. So thank you. I won't try to repeat everything. So next we had a question from, or a comment actually, from Desara. Want to interject at this point?
Yes, it was long ago, but I will still say something. And thank you to the speaker just now. I totally agree with the parts that I could listen, because there was somebody typing all the time near the mic, so it was a bit problematic. Now, I wanted to go back to the Google case, which Jutta rightly mentioned, that yes, it's true that the technology, the artificial intelligence actually detected that there were genitals of a child. And I think everyone knows that the technology can already do that. It's easy to detect genitals, and it's easy to detect also that it's of a child. I mean, there are technologies to detect the skin and find a way to understand that it's a child, even if there is no, the face is not shown. But the problem is that we need to make sure that this technology that might correctly detect the genitals detects also the context related to that image, so that we don't have these cases where parents get flagged as child predators. If the technology just detects images and totally out of context, then we will have all of these false positives. And imagine what happens with the parent being named and shamed, and everyone learning about it and going through the process of law enforcement. And maybe the child will be taken away from that parent until the case is solved. So all the trauma that goes on in this case, we need to make sure that we have the right technology that can also make a connection with the context. And I think this is what this proposal is about the context. And this is also the main concern of the privacy experts, I think, because if we detect without the context, also without the context is problematic, yes, but if we detect also with the context, then we will have the text, and we will cause all of those privacy issues that the speaker, that the speaker just raised there in the room. And I also wanted to comment on Andrew. He said about something about automation, and he said that the question is whether automation can solve the problem of humans not having to check one by one the images. And I think that is a very important question, and this is related with what I just said before. And this is also what this proposal is about, because so far it has been a human always checking the images, but now this regulation is relying heavily on the technology and assuming that the technology is able to do so, and with very little or no human oversight. But I think so far we don't have such a technology that can do it without human oversight. Probably in the future we will have it, but since we don't have it now, we need to make sure that we have a good human oversight, and we need to really assess these technologies before allowing them to be used. And also because of all of these problems, I think that the regulation could do better in the sections regarding the redress and contestation safeguards, which currently I think they are very vague, and they should clarify what measures are taken so that the name of a wrongfully identified person, for example, is not included at the child predators list of the law enforcements of Europol, but also national law enforcements. And there need to be some predefined criteria about the kind of technology that can be used for these cases to make sure that we don't infringe the privacy and other human rights of people with a technology that actually doesn't work. So we need to be sure that the technology works so that the intervention can be proportionate and necessary, because before deciding to make an intervention that is an infringement of other human rights, we need to think, are there other ways that are less intrusive?
Great, thank you very much, Desara. I'm just gonna look at our key participants here to see if you do, yes, okay. Before we go into that, just to let everyone know, we're running out of time in our schedule, but we do have an option to extend the session around 15-20 minutes. So if you have the option to stay longer, we can continue the discussion after 11:30. But please, Michael, would you like to go next?
I was just going to make a very brief point around the cases that were mentioned earlier around authoritarian states, and I think this has been actually put in the chat as well. But I don't think that's a case to not act on child sexual abuse material. I think children also have a right to privacy, right? So they have the right not to have child sexual abuse images of them circulating online. That's a complete and utter and total violation of their privacy. And I think if there are steps that we can take to control that, then that's what we should be doing. We should be judging society based on the actions that we take to protect the most vulnerable within our society. I don't see anyone else more vulnerable in society than children, and preserving their innocence and their right to privacy. So, respectfully, I think that this is a really important thing that we should be doing. The UK government's done an awful lot of work through the online safety bill as well, so that the EU's legislation is not the only piece of legislation. We've done work within end-to-end encrypted environments, where we've given a little bit of seed money to look at what might be possible in those environments. You could stop images entering those environments and leaving those environments in a privacy-preserving way. So there are things out there that we could look at that would preserve privacy, where we're looking for exactly a child sexual abuse image, and we've shown that can be done. So I don't think that isn't a reason to act, and they've been very clear that this is not about repurposing this technology for any other means. It's about purely detecting child sexual abuse material, and in the case of the online safety bill, terrorism as well.
Thank you, Michael. Timo, would you like to interject at this point?
Yes, just briefly again. There were plenty of things I'd like to comment, but maybe there's something related to law enforcement and regulation in general. Someone said about that if detection order would be placed for a certain company, and then the perpetrators would be moving to another service or something like that. But like Michael said earlier, someone anyway, that the kids, they also are producing lots of material themselves. Those victims, they are being persuaded to do that. They are being blackmailed to do that. So offenders, they are there where the kids are. So if criminals would be moving to another service, our children, they would be still in the same service, whether it's a Snapchat or WhatsApp, they will be there. The grooming would be there also. So when it comes to sharing child sexual abuse images, then of course there might be a different service for that. And then law enforcement would have to, together with the private sector, would have to target those companies. But when it comes to grooming, they are there where the children are also. And there was also a discussion about Google, and if we are giving too much power for big companies because of this regulation. I think they already have quite a lot of power. We should have had this discussion 20 years or 30 years ago. So they have their terms of service. And if according to Google terms of service, it's not allowed to share child sexual abuse images. And they will do now, they will also do that in the future. They can independently do their decisions, what they are going to do with the user and the account and so on. So if we want to make a change to that, then we should introduce a new legislation regulating those internet service providers, what they can and what they cannot do with our information. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we had a question here. Would you like to ask or comment? If you want to come to the front here. Okay.
My name is Aki Ketulainen, and I'm with the Electronic Frontier Finland also. I was quite surprised to learn how much CSAM material is available on public web services in Europe. And if I was to distribute this kind of illegal material, I would never do it in public web services. And another aspect I would like to mention is that there's research showing that if people are aware of data surveillance like this, they will start self-censoring their communications. And what do you think about this?
Would you like to comment on self-censor? There was also a question on Mentimeter on that. So
Yeah, I can come in on the public hosting as well. I mean, I think that just goes to demonstrate the problem, right? If we've got that many people that are hosting this openly, we're finding it that easily. What is happening in environments where we currently can't see? And what happens when we turn the lights out in some of those environments through end-to-end encryption? I just think that, you know, the scale of this is unbelievable. You know, in the UK, we've looked at our National Crime Agency's done an assessment of how many people pose a sexual threat to children. And it's somewhere between 550,000 and 850,000 people in a population of 60 million. So you're talking something like 1 in 60. So you think about like a conference that we're here today, there's potentially someone that's viewed child sexual abuse imagery if you look at those figures. So, you know, I just to come back on the public hosting point and the scale of this, I think it's scary what's out there. And I think it's scary what we don't know as well.
yes, thank you.
Also interested on your opinion about data surveillance and self-censorship.
In terms of, so I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So in terms of like people uploading things and not, and so basically saying not, they wouldn't upload.
I meant that if they are aware of data surveillance, they will change how they communicate with other people.
Yeah, I think that's something that that's a possibility anyway, that of course people are always going to change how they communicate, and that's a technical challenge that everybody has to keep up with as well.
Timo, you wanted to?
Just quick reply to that. Companies are doing that all the time. They have access to your information. Are you changing the way you are communicating as they have access to your information? I'm just talking from the law enforcement perspective. We have in individual cases, we might have right for lawful interception. And with some companies, it could work in criminal investigation. But those companies that don't provide end-to-end encryption, your information is there.
Thank you. What I think we will do now is we have 3 more listed questions, or actually 4 from the audience. So we'll take those and then we'll do a final round from the key participants, if that's okay with everyone.
I was waiting
Yes.
already for
Okay, perfect. Do you want to go next? I think you're on our list here, so please.
Catherine Garcia from the internet. So building up on some comments we already heard on mitigation measures, design choices, and of course the how do we design better study in Europe, which is actually one of the frameworks for data regulation, system regulation. I would like to share a bit of my reflection on looking at this side of the prevention, mitigation, how to understand that this can also lead to the use of immigration. So we're talking about the need to empower youth and children. And so I think it's also time to think about encryption as a tool for empowerment. So for when companies are designing, so a bit of like safety by design kind of narrative, they should also consider this. And not only that, but that should be full used by able to be used by children and youth. So definitely I would point out that, put it on the table, maybe some reflection, maybe some but that's something we are missing from the conversation. And at the end, some regulations, undermine the use of encryption. But not seeing the mitigation, the prevention side, the empowering and sort of active participation of youth and children, which also is the aim of generally this regulation.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to repeat some of what you said to make sure that the online audience also hears. So there was a comment about empowering youth and using encryption as a tool for that empowerment. But before we go into that, I'm noticing that there's some maybe comments coming from the key participants, but we have actually two more questions from the audience here. So yes, you're next, please. Would you like to come to the front?
No, I think people can hear me. So we've only been talking about really the pictures here, but it's really like, for example, we were given an example of a child abuser who had I don't know, abused 200 kids, but how many of those were actually because they were able to detect the pictures that the kids were sending to the guy? I mean, were there even any? Was it really that he was just grooming through text and then meeting the kids and then abusing them, right? I think it's also like a lot harder to detect the grooming if it's done by text. And if this kind of law comes into effect, I'm sure that they will not be asking kids to send naked pictures of themselves anymore. It will only happen through text. And then the amount of false positives will become quite enormous. And that will take a lot more resources than a cop having a look at, oh, is this a naked kid in the photo versus what's the context in the text here? You will have to be going through so much material that there will not be enough police resources anywhere. Then I think there's been a false dichotomy between the privacy of the child sexual abuser against the right not to be abused. But it's not, that's really like one against one there, but it's actually that, are we willing to basically sacrifice our privacy because some like very small number, like we're talking of one of 100,000 or 1 per million that is abused. I would not want to live in a society that all my communications can be monitored. That will bring chill effects to the society. And yeah, also it was said here that, okay, this child sexual abuse material is publicly available. I would dare anyone in the room or online, try to find it. It's very hard. It is like, I've really tried to look at like,
please don't.
in
Please don't.
2008, when there was the censorship law in Finland, when I actually lost my trust in the government, because it was said this censorship law became in effect because it was said that all the child abuse material is in Asia and in some countries, Russia, where we can't get it off them. But when we actually went through the material, the secret list of the police was printed on a webpage in Finland by a famous hacker. And we actually went through the material, had a look at it. Less than 1% was actually child sexual abuse material. But for example, 3 first pages, if you went through Google in 2008 in Finland and searched for gay porn, 3 first hits were on this list, right? And like 95%, over 95% of the actual material was hosted in Western countries. So basically using this law to like say that we have to have this law so that we can get this material off was completely unbased.
Thank you. One final comment or question before we get to key participants. So if you have taken notes, you can comment in just a minute. So Andrew, you had the final comment or question.
Again, I'll come to the front.
Please.
Because the comments in the chat about people not hearing. Just two thoughts picking up things that have been said. First one on end-to-end encryption, and dare I say, I think the Internet Society's position on this is hugely simplistic. People refer to encryption as the magic bullet that will give you privacy and security. It's just technically wrong to equate encryption with either of those two things. I would respectfully point out that all of the major malware now uses encryption. It uses end-to-end encryption. So end-to-end encryption is not a magic thing that gives you privacy.
Yes.
No, that's factually wrong. If you're having end-to-end encryption, let's be clear, the endpoint that you're using is absolutely still open to active monitoring by, for example, the social media platforms. So that
maybe your system.
So that your data can be, or data about you can be exfiltrated from your system without your knowledge using end-to-end encryption. So to somehow say that it automatically means privacy is wrong. And also, and if you speak to CISOs of enterprises, they're very worried about the use of end-to-end encryption because it bypasses their cybersecurity steps. And if you understand privacy, you will completely get that if your security is weak, then you're open to software landing on your platform, which will completely bypass your security measures, and therefore you will have no privacy. So just assuming that by magically implementing end-to-end encryption, you have privacy, you have security, that is wrong. It might be in some specific applications, but it's equally not the case in others. So we shouldn't always say it gives you a solution. And then to say it's a societal, people have said it's a societal problem, not a technical problem. Yes, that's true, but technology amplifies the problem significantly. And so we shouldn't ignore how much worse technology makes the problem. It doesn't make the problem go away, but we can certainly stop it being amplified. That is the issue that I think we need to address it. We can't just ignore it because it will happen regardless. That doesn't give us an excuse to not act.
Thank you, Andrew. Now we have, let's see, 6 minutes left of our final deadline. So I'm going to ask all the key participants to give your final comments. You can comment on what's been said or simply raise whatever you'd like to raise at this point. And would Desara like to go first?
Yes, there's so many things that I would like to say, but my brain is like, many ideas are coming at the same time, and I don't know where to start, but I'll just put it very shortly. So my key point would be that we should not leave the solution to the technology to fix a societal issue. Yes, we should use technology to help us in fighting this crime, but we should not base everything in technology. We should not think that technology will be the solution and everything. It will be fine. We have to have stronger safeguards in place. We have to have human oversight, and we have to have stronger collaboration among all actors so that we find solutions that are feasible and long-term.
Thank you very much. And Torsten, would you like to go next? Final comments?
Yep, for sure. Thank you, Evelina. First, I would add, or I would disagree to the point that only a small number of children are affected. In Germany, a study finds that a quarter of the boys and girls between 12 and 19 are contacted by strangers, every fourth child, and around about 80% are affected by sexual harm, for example, by sending images without consent. So it's not a small number. A small number is not affected. That's the problem that we face. And I think we need a solution, and therefore we need a regulation. Inside this regulation, we find an EU center, and this EU center could be also seen from my perspective as a kind of guarantee also for dealing with false positive before false positives are handing over to the law enforcement by overviewing from child sexual abuse specialist and checking if it's a false positive or not, and only handling the real problem images to the law enforcement. Also, this center could be a guarantee for misusing this proposal, for example, by member states, which maybe are not that democratic as we want them to be. So to see this member states not violate fundamental rights by using this proposal and find measures for other issues. So if we have a strong EU center, these member states cannot act alone and realize this, as it was mentioned. Also, I want to say that it is true, we do not want only technology solutions, and therefore I want to remind that at the same day when the EU proposal was published by the EU Commission, it was also published the Better Internet for Kids strategy. So we want to face the serious problem with a comprehensive approach. And if you see both together, the proposal to prevent and fight against sexual abuse and the Better Internet for Kids strategy, then I think the EU met the aim to create a digital environment that creates safety for children.
Thank you, Torsten. Thank you. And final comments. Michael, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so I think Andrew summed up very well on the position on end-to-end encryption. I would say, if companies are looking at deploying end-to-end encryption solutions, I think that's fine, but they have to have in place adequate child safety mechanisms. It shouldn't just be, one of those things that is done because it preserves privacy. They should be able to detect child sexual abuse images, child sexual abuse material, grooming in the same way that they do now, and preferably enhance that response as well. So I think that's really, really important on end-to-end encryption. On some of the comments that were made over here, I mean, child sexual abuse is one click away on the internet. People can get to it incredibly easily. All of the content we remove from the internet is removed from the open internet. So, we are finding this in huge numbers. As I mentioned earlier, there's huge numbers of offenders out there as well. So I don't think we should be turning a blind eye to this. And in your comments around privacy as well, and you said you wouldn't want your private communications monitored, I would just ask as well, how many children do you think it is subject to child sexual abuse via the internet? I'd argue none. And I'd also think one case of child sexual abuse is one case too many. And some of the imagery that we're removing from the internet is of victims that have been circulating for years and years and years because we don't have appropriate controls in place. And there are measures that are able to prevent that from circulating. For example, if hashing technology was deployed much more broadly across the internet, we can ensure that these images aren't there in the first place. And I think that's something that we should all want and try to achieve.
Thank you very much. Timo, we're out of time, but please do give us your final remarks.
Thank you. Well, I would like to repeat what I said in the beginning about regulation. Something has to be done. The private sector needs to be doing more than they are doing at the moment. And then I would like to add also that we should strengthen the role of NGOs and civil society in fighting against sexual abuse of children. That's it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the participants. It's been a great discussion, and hopefully we can continue it offline as well. And I thank you all the key participants and EuroDIG.